Hi, this is Ted, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, December 29th New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And we'll start with more Kennedy Center performances are canceled after Trump's renaming. This is by Adam Nagorny. A prominent New York dance company on Monday said it was canceling its performances at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in protest of the center's being renamed to include President Trump. The decision by Doug Verone and dancers is the latest by artists who have canceled appearances at one of the nation's preeminent arts centers this month. An earlier set of withdrawals and resignations took place in February after the president pushed out members of the board of directors and replaced them with his supporters. On Monday, the Kennedy Center's website also said that two scheduled New Year's Eve performances by the Cookers, a jazz ensemble, had been canceled. The center had previously promoted the performances as an all-star jazz septet that will ignite the Terrace Theater stage with fire and soul. The reason for those cancellations was not immediately clear. They came after the jazz musician Chuck Redd canceled his annual free Christmas Eve concert at the center. Doug Verone and dancers said it was withdrawing from a two-night stand in April that had been intended to celebrate the company's 40th anniversary. Verone, the head of the company, said it would lose $40,000 by pulling out. It is financially devastating, he said, but morally exhilarating. The artists who have protested in recent weeks include Christy Lee, a folk singer from Alabama, who announced she was pulling out from a free concert on January 14th. "I won't lie to you. Canceling shows hurts," she said. "This is how I keep the lights on. But losing my integrity would cost me more than any paycheck." The center has responded aggressively to some of the cancellations. Richard Grinnell, the chairman of the center, threatened a $1 million lawsuit against Mr. Redd after he canceled the Christmas Eve concert. The Kennedy Center did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Monday about the artist withdrawals. In his letter to Mr. Redd, Mr. Grinnell said, "Your decision to withdraw at the last moment, explicitly in response to the center's recent renaming, which honors President Trump's extraordinary efforts to save this national treasure, is classic intolerance." This cancellation underscores the difficulties that Mr. Grinnell and Mr. Trump have faced in trying to remake the center in the president's name. Those who canceled performances or resigned advisory roles in February included the Pulitzer Prize winner Rhiannon Giddens, the soprano Renee Fleming, and the singer-songwriter Ben Folds. The president recently hosted the Kennedy Center Honors, which featured a roster of hand-picked artists, including Gloria Gaynor and Sylvester Stallone, and was televised on CBS last week. Doug Verone and dancers were scheduled to appear at the Kennedy Center's Eisenhower Theater on April 24th and April 25th. Mr. Verone said the group had agreed to appear to honor two of the center's top dance administrators, Jane Raleigh and Alicia Adams, both of whom have since left the institution. "We can no longer permit ourselves nor ask our audiences to step inside this once great institution," he said. Here's another story. As youth sports professionalize, kids are burning out fast. Like many mothers in Southern California, Paula Garton put her twin son and daughter, Mikey and Maddie, into youth sports leagues as soon as they were old enough. For years, they loved playing soccer, baseball, and other sports, getting exercise and making friends. But by their early teens, the competition got stiffer. The coaches became more demanding, injuries intervened, and their travel teams demanded they focus on only one sport. Shuttling to weekend tournaments turned into a chore. Sports became less enjoyable. Maddie dropped soccer because she didn't like the coach and took up volleyball. Mikey played club soccer and baseball as a youngster, then chose baseball before he suffered a knee injury in his first football practice during the baseball off-season. By 15, he had stopped playing team sports. Both are now in college and more focused on academics. I feel like there's so much judgment around youth sports. If you're not participating in sports, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing as a kid, said Mrs. Garten. There's this expectation you should be involved, that it's something you should be doing. You feel you have to push your kids, there's pressure on them. Youth sports can have a positive effect on children's self esteem and confidence and teach them discipline and social skills. But a growing body of recent research has shown how coaches and parents can heap pressure on children, how heavy workloads can lead to burnout and fractured relationships with family and friends, and how overuse injuries can stem from playing single sports. A report published by the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2024 showed how overuse injuries and overtraining can lead to burnout in young athletes. The report cited pressure by parents and coaches as additional risk factors. Another study in the Journal of Sport and Social Issues highlighted how giving priority to a win at all costs culture can stunt a young athlete's personal development and well-being. Researchers at the University of Hawaii found that abusive and intrusive behavior by parents can add to stress on athletes. Mental health is a vast topic, from clinical issues like depression and suicidal thoughts to anxiety and psychological abuse. There is now a broad movement to increase training for coaches so they can identify signs and symptoms of mental health conditions, said Vince Manjares, a program manager in the Aspen Institute Sports and Society program. Since 2020, 7 states have begun requiring coaches to receive mental health training, he said. Domineering coaches and parents have been around for generations, but their pressure has been amplified by the professionalization of youth sports. A growing number of sports leagues are being run as profit-driven businesses to meet demand from parents who urge their children to play at earlier ages to try to improve their chances of playing college or pro sports. According to a survey by the Aspen Institute, 11.4% of parents believe their children can play professionally. There's this push to specialize earlier and earlier, said Meredith Whitley, a professor at Adelphi University, who studies youth sports. But at what cost? For those young people, you're seeing burnout happen earlier because of injuries, overuse, and mental fatigue. The additional stress is one reason more children are dropping out. The share of school-age children playing sports fell to 53.8% in 2022, from 58.4% in 2017, according to the National Survey of Children's Health. While more than 60 million adolescents play sports, up to 70% of them drop out by age 13. While groups like the Aspen Institute focus on long-standing issues of access and cost in youth sports, efforts to combat mental health issues for young athletes are an emerging area. In recent years, professional athletes like Naomi Osaka and Michael Phelps have shone a light on the issue. But parents who want to teach their children the positive parts of playing sports are finding that some of the worst aspects of being a young athlete are hard to avoid. That was apparent to the parents who brought their sons to hear Travis Snyder speak at Driveline Academy in Kent, Washington, one Sunday last spring. Mr. Snyder was a baseball phenom growing up near Seattle and was taken by the Toronto Blue Jays in the first round of the 2006 Major League Baseball draft. But he finished 8 unremarkable seasons as an outfielder and played his last Major League game at 27. While attempting to come back in the minor leagues, he worked with a life coach to help him make sense of why his early promise fizzled. He unearthed childhood traumas and unrealistic expectations on the field. In a playoff game, as an 11-year-old, he had a panic attack on the mound and was removed from the game. Though he reached the highest level of the sport, Mr. Snyder felt that distorted priorities turned baseball into a burden, something he wanted to help others avoid. Last year, he started a company, 3A Athletics, to help children, parents, and coaches develop healthier approaches to sports that include separating professional aspirations from the reality that most young athletes just want to get some exercise and make friends. We as a culture really blended the two into the same experience, which is really toxic for kids as they're going through the early stages of identity formation, he said. You have a lot of parents who are sports fans who want to watch youth sports the same way they watch pro sports without recognizing, hey, the thing I love the most is out there running around on the field. He added, we've got to take a step back and detach from what has become normalized and what kind of vortex we get sucked into. Driveline Academy, an elite training facility filled with batting cages, speed guns, sensors, and framed jerseys of pro players, might be the kind of vortex Mr. Snyder would want people to avoid. But Devin Morgan, who is the director of youth baseball at Driveline, hired 3A Athletics to help parents and young athletes put their sport into context. It's part of a stack of tools we can deploy to our families and kids to help them understand that there is a structured way that you can understand this stuff and relate to your kid, he said. We are going to get more out of this entire endeavor if we approach this thing from a lens of positivity. During his 1 hour seminar, Mr. Snyder and his partner, Seth Taylor, told the 6 sets of parents and sons how to navigate the mental roadblocks that come from competitive sports. Mr. Snyder showed the group a journal he kept during the 2014 season that helped him overcome some of his fears and encouraged the ball players to do the same. It's not just about writing the bad stuff, he said. The whole goal is to start to open up about this stuff. Mr. Taylor took the group through a series of mental exercises, including visualization and relaxation techniques aimed at helping players confront their fears and for parents to understand their roles as a support system. His message seemed to get through to Amy Worrell-Neller, who had brought her 14-year-old son Wyatt to the session. She said, generally there's always a few parents who are the ones who seem to be hanging on too tight, and the kids take that on. At this age, they're social creatures, but it starts with the parents. Coaches play a role too. The Catholic Youth Organization in the Diocese of Cleveland has been trying to ratchet down the pressure on young athletes. At a training session in August, about 120 football, soccer, volleyball, and cross-country coaches met for 3 hours to learn how to create safe spaces for children. Kids start to drop out by 12 or 13 because it's not fun, and parents can make it not fun, said Drew Valinsky, the trainer. Kids are tired and distracted before they get to practice and have a limited amount of time, so don't let it get stale. Coaches were told, among other things, to let children lead stretches and other tasks to promote confidence. Track coaches should use whistles, not starting guns, and withhold times from young runners during races. We're trying not to overwhelm a kid with anxiety, said Lisa Ryder, a track and cross-country coach for runners through 8th grade. CYO is not going to get your kid to be LeBron. And here is kind of an important article. It's called Flagged for Sexual Misconduct. Many Uber drivers stay on the road. Over 15 days in February 2023, Uber received 3 increasingly alarming reports about one of its drivers in Pennsylvania. One passenger said the driver called me the N-word. Another said he made her feel uncomfortable by asking if she wanted a drink and whether she lived alone. A third reported being scared out of my mind after the driver stopped the car to ask for her phone number and where to get marijuana. Uber told 2 of the passengers that it was reviewing the driver's account, court records showed. Let me assure you that the driver's access to the Uber app will be evaluated accordingly, both messages said. The driver, who had been with Uber for less than 2 months, was ultimately sent a warning and educational materials on how to behave appropriately. At 10:36 p.m. on March 13th, less than 2 weeks after the last complaint, the driver arrived at a Wendy's in Allentown to pick up a 16-year-old girl who had finished her shift, according to a lawsuit against Uber. He insisted that she sit in the front seat. She didn't want to, but she did anyway because she was scared and just wanted to get home. The driver groped her inner thighs when they were on the road, she said in the lawsuit, then forcibly kissed her when they pulled up to her house. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. As Uber upended the business of transporting people, it sold the public on the idea that technology would replace outdated safeguards, with a system smart enough to intervene before someone's safety was in jeopardy. By allowing customers to submit complaints or poor ratings via its app after a trip, and by using GPS tracking, among other measures, Uber says it can move quickly to weed out problem drivers. That technology has recorded patterns that the company's own data scientists have used to identify warning signs for sexual violence. In 2017, they found that drivers were far likelier to commit sexual assault if passenger feedback included words like kiss, sex, flirt, and creepy, according to an internal report titled Sexual Assaults, Trends and Correlates. Incidents were 12 times more likely if a driver had previous reports to the company of sexual misconduct. Yet Uber has left many drivers with records of complaints on the road until passengers accuse them of serious sexual assault, according to a New York Times investigation based on lawsuits, previously unreported internal company documents, court records, and interviews with more than a dozen current and former employees. That's despite a company policy that explicitly prohibits sexual assault and sexual misconduct. The teenager in Pennsylvania is now suing the company, accusing it of negligence. Her case is one of more than 3,000 sexual assault lawsuits that Uber is facing in state and federal courts across the country, part of a growing reckoning over sexual misconduct and sexual assault during Uber rides. A central question is whether Uber is responsible for the misconduct of its drivers. The Times has previously reported that sexual violence happens at a level far greater than what the company has publicly disclosed, and that its background checks approve aspiring drivers with many types of criminal convictions, including violent felonies. Uber's monitoring system for drivers already on the network is a cornerstone of its approach to safety, aiming to minimize harm through constant scrutiny. But the company's disciplinary efforts are at times handcuffed by how it built its business, according to the internal documents and current and former employees. Drivers are contractors and not employees, which helps Uber avoid paying employee benefits, minimum wage, or overtime. In turn, Uber has limited what it requires of drivers. It does not, for example, mandate audio or video recording, which could not only help deter bad behavior, but also provide concrete evidence to support or refute accusations. The system is also complicated by fraudulent complaints that Uber receives from passengers seeking a free ride, making it hard for the company to filter for legitimate warning signs, said current and former employees. In a statement, Hannah Nils, Uber's head of safety for the Americas, said that Uber takes action on reports based on their specificity and severity. We know that sexual assault is a deeply traumatic experience, which is why we handle every report with the highest level of care, she said. The company, she added, receives many one-word or extremely vague reports that make it difficult to understand what happened, as well as many fake claims angling for a refund. When it comes to investigating safety-related reports and making the decision to ban someone from Uber, we are constantly balancing our commitment to safety with legitimate fairness concerns. Our decision not to mandate video recording was mostly about the real practical challenges and privacy concerns, she said. In Georgia, Uber had received at least 7 allegations about a driver's behavior, including complaints of sexual misconduct, carrying guns, and driving under the influence, before a passenger accused him of rape in 2022, according to a lawsuit against the company. In Texas, Uber's monitoring systems flagged a driver to be barred in June 2024 for repeatedly violating company policies, according to an internal Uber investigation. But Uber never sent him a warning, and he continued to drive. A month later, he was accused of picking up a 12-year-old girl from a pediatric health facility for an Uber trip and forcing her to perform oral sex on him in a church parking lot. A Texas jury recently found him guilty of aggravated sexual assault of a child, sentencing him to 8 years in prison. The man should have never been allowed to be driving for Uber at the time of this assault, said Robert Greening, a lawyer for the girl. Ms. Niles said the driver in Texas was flagged to be barred because of several complaints about an extra person in the vehicle. She said that the company gave drivers extra leeway for these reports because they could happen when passengers thought they booked a private ride but mistakenly booked a shared trip. In the interest of fairness, we always aim to give drivers a final warning when they are approaching deactivation for non-serious reports like this. Ms. Niles added that the trip violated Uber rules that require minors to be accompanied by an adult, with the exception of the company's special services for teenagers, which has stricter standards for drivers. She said that the driver in the Georgia incident received one complaint for flirting in 2019, for which he was given a warning and follow-up educational materials on appropriate behavior. She said that the driver denied some of the other allegations, which Uber investigated and deemed fraudulent. She added that although reports against the driver in Pennsylvania, later accused of assaulting the 16-year-old, were noted on his account, at least one was from a customer Uber had identified for repeated fraudulent claims. The 16-year-old was not using the company's teen service. The company has long maintained that the vast majority of its trips in the U.S., 99.9%, occur without an incident of any kind. Painting Uber drivers as potential sexual predators, especially when Uber is leading the transportation industry in safeguards, seems unfair and needlessly harmful to the many people who rely on driving for Uber to make a living, said Bella Dinzar, a member of Uber's Safety Advisory Board. Ms. Nils said that no company or organization akin to ours tracks and responds to reports like Uber. What would happen if someone reported an incident of staring or leering to a bar, hotel, restaurant, transit agency, or even to the police? Likely nothing, she said. Uber takes action on these reports, including warning the reported against party and making a note in their account, so that their history of reports will be factored into any future deactivation decisions. Inside Uber, executives have acknowledged that dangerous activities could be significantly underreported. Passengers rated drivers on only 46% of trips, according to a 2021 presentation. That means that more than half of the time, we don't even know if it was a good or bad experience, notes for one slide read. The presentation made the case that educating drivers about appropriate behavior was critical to safety in its business. We can address the root cause of high severity and large loss claims, another slide read, referring to instances when the company would be held financially responsible for incidents that had occurred. When Uber receives complaints about drivers, it often follows one of two paths. A team inside the company investigates claims that the company considers to be more serious, including non-consensual sexual penetration, kissing or touching. Agents start by identifying the person accused of misconduct and temporarily revoking that driver's access to the Uber app during the review. The investigators then try to speak with both parties and collect evidence about what happened, including GPS information as well as video or audio footage if passengers or drivers recorded the trip. But a majority of complaints, including leering, flirting, and other categories of sexual misconduct that Uber has deemed less serious, are not typically investigated by an employee, according to the company's sexual misconduct policy. Oh, dear. Instead, those reports are logged into Uber's systems, and drivers receive automated warnings and training that they are not required to acknowledge. In August 2022, a woman in Florida reported that her Uber driver made her feel uncomfortable during a ride to the gym. He asked to follow her on Instagram, then appeared to wait in the area so that he would be the one to pick her up for a return trip, she said. Uber classified the incident as flirting, then sent the driver, who had recently been released from prison for armed robbery, an email with educational videos. All caps, no response required, the email said. The next week, another passenger accused the driver of rape. She later sued the company. The driver, who admitted to having sex with the passenger but said it was consensual, said in a deposition for the lawsuit that he had not gone through any training before driving for Uber. Uber's policies prohibit drivers from having sex with passengers. Through the reporting system, drivers accumulate notations for sexual misconduct or other issues. The number of notations for a given incident depends on the severity of the report and the amount of evidence Uber gathers. Drivers are barred from the app after 3 notations. Uber's service for teenagers requires drivers to have no reports of sexual misconduct whatsoever and includes a number of additional safety precautions. Parents or guardians can receive real-time updates about the trip and are able to contact the driver via the app. The company bars drivers for reports of serious sexual assault, Ms. Nils said, if investigators are able to obtain a statement from passengers reporting an incident or other corroborating information, including GPS data, photos, audio recording, video recording, or notification from law enforcement. People who make fake claims can be denied refunds or be barred from Uber. Conclusive evidence like audio or video can be difficult to come by. Through its app, Uber offers the option for drivers and passengers to record audio and for drivers to record video. Over the years, executives expressed fears that, in addition to privacy concerns, mandating recordings could impose a level of supervision or control that would lead to a reclassification of drivers as employees rather than contractors, which would increase costs and jeopardize the financial structure of the company. Because of our independent contractor model, there are very specific constraints in the amount of mandated training and interventions that can be imposed, read a 2017 document. Mr. Nils said that Ms. Nils said that Uber requires drivers in the U.S. to complete trainings for sexual assault and sexual misconduct that the company developed with RAINN, the Anti-Sexual Violence Organization. Accusations can sometimes develop into he said, she said situations. Soon after Victoria Hin Lee began driving for Uber in Texas in 2020, a passenger said that he had offered to go into her house and give her a massage. Uber said it conducted an investigation, and Mr. Lee denied the allegation. Uber ultimately described the incident as resolved sexual misconduct and noted it on his record. We spoke to the driver, who denied the reported incident, and were unable to speak to the rider. When the driver was reactivated, he was warned and provided education on appropriate behavior. Months later, a passenger accused Mr. Lee of forcing her to perform oral sex on him during an Uber trip while he was driving 70 miles per hour on a highway in the middle of the night. A jury later found him guilty of the sexual assault, sentencing him to 11 years in prison. A lawyer for Mr. Lee could not be reached for comment. In 2017, before Mr. Lee joined Uber, a woman had reported him to the police in Fort Worth, saying he impersonated an Uber driver to lure her into his car and sexually assaulted her, according to a copy of the report. The woman told police that she had called Uber to report what had happened, but Ms. Nils said that Uber had not found any records regarding the incident. Before Timothy Alexander Green's final ride in Oklahoma, passengers had complained about him on 3 occasions. He was able to stay on the road for a different reason each time. Mr. Green was driving for Lyft in 2019 when a passenger accused him of rape. She reported the incident to Lyft and the police.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Mr. Green was driving for Lyft in 29. Oh, sorry. Mr. Green was barred from Lyft, but by that next year he had switched to Uber. That June, he picked up a woman who had been out drinking. Her cousin had ordered her a ride home. The woman said that she woke up in a car parked in a garage she didn't recognize. Mr. Green had driven her north to his house instead of south toward hers, according to court records. The cousin reported the incident to Uber, which said it would restrict Mr. Green from the app while it investigated the incident. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Ms. Nils said that the investigation, which involved speaking with the passenger, the cousin, and Mr. Green, found that the driver asked to use the restroom and get more coffee as the trip was expected to be 40 plus minutes. Despite the initial report from the account holder, when we got in touch with the rider herself, she stated she did not feel threatened. Both parties indicated there was no unwanted behavior. Ms. Nils declined to provide a transcript of the investigation. After its investigation, Uber sent Mr. Green a warning and materials about appropriate behavior, then allowed him to pick up passengers again. In January 2021, a female passenger reported feeling unsafe with Mr. Green, stating that she thought he was a trafficker who was going to kidnap her, court records show. Ms. Nils said the report was deemed fraudulent. That March, Uber and Lyft announced a new joint safety program designed to share information about drivers and delivery people who had been barred for sexual assault and physical violence to prevent them from simply changing companies. Yet, Mr. Green continued driving. Uber said it received no notice from Lyft about him. Lyft declined to comment. 2 months later, in May, he picked up a woman who had been celebrating her niece's engagement at a bar in Edmond, Oklahoma, and was intoxicated. Her niece had ordered her an Uber. The next thing the woman remembered was waking up behind a steering wheel in a garage that she had never seen before. She was barefoot, her jeans were disheveled, and her underwear was in her purse. Her wallet and phone were missing. She walked to a neighbor's house, called 911, and later underwent a sexual assault forensic exam at the hospital. A nurse documented bruises and abrasions all over her body and debris and grass in her vaginal area. A jury later convicted Mr. Green of sexual battery, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Separately, he was charged with rape for the 2019 Lyft incident and is now awaiting trial. He maintains his innocence and looks forward to his day in court to be judged by a jury of his peers, said his lawyer. The woman from the May 2021 incident sued both Uber and Lyft. She settled with Lyft, but her case with Uber is still pending. Uber has said in court filings that it was not responsible for the incident. That's a scary article. And now we'll go to some editorials. David French must be on vacation this week because there's no article by David French. So I will read a guest essay by Adam Grant, who is a contributing opinion writer and an organizational psychologist at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. The article is called Why We Fall for Narcissistic Leaders Starting in Grade School. In ancient Greek mythology, a man who falls in love with his own reflection withers away and dies. In modern America, he gets promoted to the corner office, and sometimes even elevated to the Oval Office. We should know better. Great leaders put their missions above their egos. Narcissists do the opposite. They see themselves as special and superior and put their egos above all else. So why do we keep falling for them? A study of U.S. presidential elections from 1824 to 1992 revealed that the taller candidate consistently got more votes than the shorter candidate. But height was a stronger predictor in times of social, economic, and political threat. The greater the societal instability, the more people wanted a leader who projected physical dominance and strength. That's the allure of a narcissist today. We live in a period of extraordinary unrest. Millions of people died in a pandemic, and for the first time in generations, hundreds of thousands of people have died in a land war in Europe. Climate change is a threat to our way of life, and artificial intelligence is a looming threat to our livelihood. The result for many people is an overwhelming sense of uncertainty and anxiety, and those are fertile conditions for authoritarians who promise to restore order to chaos, and for narcissists who exude intoxicating levels of confidence and charisma. Readers of a certain stripe will assume this is an article about Trump. He is, after all, the man who has boasted, "I alone can fix it, and I know more about ISIS than the generals do," who exaggerated his wealth, refused to concede that he lost an election, and described the brutal killing of a Hollywood couple as being somehow all about him. But my point is not about Trump per se. It's about why people are attracted to him and so many others like him as leaders in politics and business right now. A little grandiosity can be conducive to big disruptive ideas, but the evidence is abundant that people with high levels of narcissism make for worse leaders. To advance their own interests, they're more willing to manipulate others, cut corners, and even break laws. The stakes are especially high in politics. In one study, 120 experts rated the American presidents on their narcissism. The top three, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Andrew Jackson, all saw their legacies tarnished by corruption and disastrous decisions. Hubris led Jackson to defy the Supreme Court and forcibly remove Native Americans from their land, led Johnson to escalate the Vietnam War despite warnings from his Undersecretary of State, and led Nixon to the Watergate scandal. In business, too, narcissistic leaders wreak havoc. Banks, led by people rated as narcissistic, established riskier policies and recovered more slowly from the 2008 financial crisis. Instead of adjusting their decisions based on objective success or failure, narcissistic executives get high on social praise, which emboldens them to take even bigger risks. As they bask in the glow of yes men and flattery, they're more likely to double down on ideas that aren't working. Steve Jobs' arrogance led him to launch the overpriced Apple Lisa, burn bridges with his board, and ultimately get forced out of his own company. You can even see the costs of narcissism in professional sports. In the NBA, the more narcissistic players' tweets were, the less their teams improved over the course of the season. Narcissists are ball hogs and glory hounds. They take credit, give blame, and put themselves above the group. They see leadership as an opportunity to seize, not a responsibility to serve. A popular narrative is that we're being bamboozled by these people. We're seduced by superficial charm and fail to see the hubris that's powering it. Yet research shows that narcissists are not hard to spot. They boast about themselves, post flattering photos of themselves, sign their names with oversized letters. They feel entitled to special treatment, and when they don't get it, they signal virtuous victimhood, airing their grievances like it's Festivus. Across multiple studies, people who were well aware of narcissists' self-serving tendencies still preferred them as leaders for an unpredictable world. Psychologists find that narcissistic leaders are more appealing to people with low self-esteem. The lower our opinions of ourselves, the more insecure we're feeling, the higher our opinions of narcissists. Supporting them makes us feel special and makes them feel less threatened. It begins early. One study of elementary and middle schoolers found that in 96% of classrooms, kids who displayed narcissistic qualities were more likely to be nominated for leadership roles. If you're stuck with narcissistic bosses, it's possible to temper their worst impulses. The key is to compliment them on qualities that are clearly separate from any realm in which you need to deliver criticism. Before you question their decisions, praise their creativity, their golf handicap, their jokes. Narcissists are less aggressive when their egos are stroked. Wise leaders balance confidence with humility. They're secure enough in their strengths to acknowledge their weaknesses and learn from their critics. Whereas narcissists covet leadership roles, humble leaders are often reluctant to assume the mantle. It may not be a coincidence that George Washington had to be coaxed and cajoled into becoming the first U.S. president, and that he refused a third term. One way to get more humble leaders into power is to change the default. Instead of expecting people to elbow their way into leadership, we should consider everyone who's qualified unless they opt out. There's evidence that this simple shift is enough to reduce the gender gap in promotions, which would have the additional benefit of lowering the number of narcissists in high positions, since women are less likely to be narcissists and psychopaths, and more likely to prioritize the collective good. Countries with more female legislators are less likely to go to war, and peace agreements involving women are 35% more likely to last at least 15 years. In the early stages of the pandemic, countries and U.S. states led by women had lower COVID 19 fatality rates, in part because they did a better job showing both confidence in their plans and empathy for people's pains. And organizational psychologists have found that when male leaders are stressed, they're more likely to be hostile and abusive. Tell me again that women are too emotional to lead. It could also help to recruit people who emerge from humble beginnings. On average, people who grow up poor tend to be more effective leaders and are less likely to cheat because they're less prone to narcissism and entitlement. The same is true of people who start their careers in a recession. A history of struggle builds compassion. Of course, group averages are poor proxies for individual traits. Ultimately, the best way to stop narcissists from rising in elected office is to address the threats that are making people anxious. Greater job security and income stability should leave voters less tempted by brash candidates. In the corporate world, we promote better leaders when we stop focusing Greater job security and income stability should leave voters less tempted by brash candidates. In the corporate world, we promote better leaders when we stop focusing on their individual results alone and start weighing their contributions to others. The responsibility of leadership is too important to entrust to arrogant people. Narcissistic leaders deny their weaknesses and make themselves weaker. Humble leaders admit their weaknesses and make themselves stronger. Great leaders overcome their weaknesses and make us all better. And one more article. One of America's most successful experiments is coming to a shuddering halt, by Lydia Polgren. It was a joyous day, the fulfillment of a quarter century of hard work and relentless fundraising. Srinivasachari Tamarisa, a retired doctor living in Sugar Land, Texas, beamed with pride as his dream to erect a statue of the Hindu deity Hanuman on the grounds of a temple he had helped found came to life. A helicopter circled overhead, blanketing flower petals on the glittering likeness of the god, revered for his strength, selflessness, and devotion to faith. Priests in white and saffron robes mounted a crane to anoint the 90-foot tall statue and drape it with garlands of flowers. A crowd of hundreds gathered as both India's national song, Vande Mataram, and the Star-Spangled Banner were played, a perfect encapsulation of Indian Americans' easy blending into the mores of their adopted home, even as many maintained their own traditions. But just outside the temple walls, dozens of conservative Christian protesters gathered, castigating what they called a demon god. Local right-wing politicians seized on the topic. Why are we allowing a false statue of a false Hindu god to be here in Texas? We are a Christian nation, a U.S. Senate candidate wrote on social media. Tamarisa, who emigrated to the United States from India as a young doctor 50 years ago, was stunned. He had built a life that seemed the epitome of the American ideal, a successful career as an OB/GYN, delivering about a dozen babies a month. He paid his taxes faithfully, raised his children in this tidy, affluent suburb of Houston, then sent them off to attend elite colleges and become doctors and investment bankers. He had proudly become a citizen, and this is how his adopted country repaid his devotion? I thought this was heaven on earth, he told me as we toured the temple grounds. Now, suddenly, his neighbors were taunting his faith and questioning his right to be an American. The guys came here and said, "This is a devil," he told me. "This is not a devil. This is a guru, the teacher telling you to be fearless." and you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. These experiences have led him to question everything about his adopted home and wonder whether future generations of Indians should set their sights on a life in America. If he had his way, he'd return to India himself and live out his old age among old friends and family. But he's staying to dote on his 4 grandchildren. It's not the same, he said. Why am I here? I question that to myself. Amid an astonishing wave of anti-Indian animus, it's a question many Indian Americans are asking. In its crudest form, mostly expressed on social media, this antipathy shows up as gutter racism and religious bigotry, an endless stream of invective declaring that Indians have low IQs, worship devils, cheat their way into the country, and commit terrible crimes. But it is fostered in barely cloaked forms by top Republican officials who accuse Indians of stealing American jobs. They engage in a lot of cheating on immigration policy that is very harmful to American workers, said Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's hardline immigration crackdown. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida referred to the H-1B visa program that allows highly skilled immigrants, many of them Indian tech workers, to come to the U.S. with their families as chain migration run amok. Many Indian Americans took umbrage when J.D. Vance, who is married to a Hindu daughter of Indian immigrants, expressed his hope that his wife would someday convert to Christianity. It is a startling turn in one of the most successful migration experiments in modern history. Since 1965, when civil rights immigration law opened the United States to migrants from countries across the globe, hundreds of thousands of Indians have immigrated to the U.S. No group has made a bigger success of its opportunity. Indian Americans' median household income significantly outstrips that of white Americans overall. About 3/4 of Indian American adults have at least a college degree, and many work in high status, well paying professions in places like Houston, New York, and Silicon Valley. In public life, Indian Americans have rocketed to prominence. They have led iconic American companies like Google, Microsoft, and Pepsi, and are major players in culture and science. Several have won a Nobel Prize. They are a growing political force in both parties, too. 3 major candidates in the 2024 presidential election were of Indian ancestry. After decades of voting overwhelmingly for Democrats, last year Indian Americans, like many immigrant groups, seemed to swing right, making them a crucial sliver in the fragile coalition that elected Donald Trump. Indian Americans have really been, in many ways, the poster children for America's legal skilled immigration regime, said Milan Vaishnav, the director of the South Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, who has studied Indian Americans and grew up in Houston. It's hard to think of other groups that have been as wildly successful as Indians in America. Now, all of a sudden, 6 decades of mutually beneficial migration are coming to a shuddering halt. Most Americans have quite positive views of Indian Americans, but the combination of anti-Indian rhetoric and government visa policies, not least the chaos that has enveloped the H-1B visa, has already had a powerful chilling effect. Indians last year became the largest contingent of foreign students at American universities, but this year, arrival of Indian students fell by 44%. Over the past decade, migration has become the biggest political fault line in much of the rich world. Fights over whether and how to welcome migrants or how brutally they might be repulsed have led to a surge in support for far-right parties in many countries and helped propel Trump back to the White House. Throughout, much of the focus has been on refugees and asylum seekers from troubled, impoverished nations and those who cross borders without authorization. But increasingly, right-wing parties are taking aim at legal, highly skilled migration, too. In a way, this makes sense. Vance and other Trump administration officials blame illegal immigration for just about every difficulty Americans face: the housing shortage, unemployment, inflation, health insurance premiums, and more. But Americans face their stiffest competition for jobs and homes from immigrants here legally. Because voluntary migration is such a rare and self-selecting phenomenon, over 96% of the world's people live in the country of their birth. Americans are often competing against the best educated and most ambitious people from countries across the globe. This is especially true for India, home to 1.4 billion people. It has a formidable tradition of elite science, engineering, and medical education, accessible only to those who can ace a pitiless gauntlet of extremely competitive tests. For decades, the United States has welcomed those graduates who have contributed much to American prosperity and been rewarded for it with handsome salaries and comfortable lives in the suburban idyls that typify the American dream. But as that dream feels increasingly out of reach for many young Americans, stoking resentment at perceived outsiders who are actually achieving it makes for good, if cynical, politics. The turn against highly skilled legal immigrants, especially those who worship differently and have darker skin, was perhaps an inevitable escalation of Trump's anti-immigration movement. For America, though, the cost may be high. The United States has been profoundly changed by Indians coming to the country. It stands to reason it will be changed by their not coming as well. For decades, Indian students with degrees in highly sought-after technical fields have followed the glide path to a life in the U.S., win acceptance to a good American university, secure a student visa, and after graduating, find work at an American company. When Sushma Pasupuleti arrived at the University of Houston in 2023 to pursue a doctorate in electrical engineering, that path was wide open. Now it is all but blocked. A couple of months ago, Pasupuleti attended a job fair at the university. She approached booth after booth, resume in hand, but each representative asked one question: Are you a U.S. citizen? When she said she was not, they sent her away. I did a lot of hard work, she said, crestfallen. It's crazy how they didn't even look at my resume. She had been a star student back home in Hyderabad, winning a prize for her master's thesis at one of India's prestigious institutes of technology. Her professors encouraged her to pursue a PhD abroad, something she had never considered because she assumed that she could not afford it. Her parents had divorced when she was a young child, and her mother, who works in sales at a pharmaceutical company, raised her on her own. We are lower middle class, she told me. My mom struggled a lot, but she sent me to the best school. She tried to give me the best education, and she always believed that education is what is going to feed us. She had hoped to go to Germany, a leader in cutting-edge electrical engineering, but didn't get a scholarship. She was offered scholarships to universities in both Britain and the U.S. America, she said, had a certain allure. Whatever goes to the U.S., whoever goes to the U.S., the person would be shaped into a leader and a technical expert, she said. Anyone who has done a higher degree from America is considered very skilled worldwide. With a job and visa seeming out of reach, she has been focusing on commercializing her research. Along with her advisor and fellow students, she has been developing a smaller, more versatile version of a pulse power converter, a heavy, expensive device used in research, medical, and military settings that sends powerful and precise jolts of electricity. Together, they are trying to start a company, but even if they succeed in raising money, Pasupuleti may still struggle to get a work visa to remain in the U.S. The place where I landed is like a shaky ground, she said. I would like to find some secure place. Perhaps, she said, she could find a job in Europe. She doesn't regret the decision to come to America and said that her degree will be valuable wherever she goes. But given how much this country has invested in her education, it's puzzling that it seems determined to send her away. 3 of her fellow PhD students are also from elsewhere, 2 from China and 1 from the Ivory Coast. That is not unusual. According to the National Science Foundation, foreign students have been awarded more engineering and computer science doctorates than have U.S. citizens and permanent residents for over 2 decades. Top programs usually include tuition and a stipend, so American universities are spending considerable sums educating engineers who may have no choice but to leave the country rather than build their careers in America. Obviously, we're all grateful for the scholarships, but if they don't want us to work here, she said, I'm sure they have their reasons. As the world's two largest democracies, the US and India have had a surprisingly fraught relationship as nations. But as peoples, Americans and Indians have enjoyed a long, mutually fruitful engagement. The Indian American writer Suketu Mehta describes this as a game of transcontinental ping pong. First, the New England transcendentalists were inspired by the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. Then a young Indian lawyer in South Africa by the name of Mohandas Gandhi read Ralph Waldo Emerson, helping to inspire the movement for Indian independence. In turn, Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance influenced Martin Luther King Jr. during the American Civil Rights Movement, which itself led to the opening of America to Indian immigrants, including Mehta and his parent. Should merit be smothered, America's historic advantages in science, technology, industry, defense, and innovation will evaporate. However, we cannot allow meritocracy to be used as a justification to open America's labor market to the world in the name of finding global talents that undercuts American workers. Trumpism seems to be seeking a form of talent autarky. This is a radical change, and one that will surely leave the United States poorer, weaker, and more isolated. I cannot help but detect in these nativist outbursts against Indian immigrants and their descendants a profound loss of confidence. The protesters, repulsed by the towering Hanuman statue, saw it as a threat to their culture, religion, and traditions. But to me, that glittering hulk of alloyed metal symbolizes something else, the enduring magnetism of America's promise, tarnished though it may be. And for the last hour, you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, December 29th New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. This is Ted. I hope you're having a nice holiday season, that you're staying warm and not inconvenienced by this terrible weather. And I look forward to being with you next week. Thank you for listening. Bye.